Would you pour me some tea, please? I want to thank you for inviting me to your tea party today,
You're
Emma.
welcome.
Thank you. What kind of tea are we going to have today? Is that Earl Grey?
Why's Earl Grey? He's sick.
Is he sick? That's funny. Well, I was hoping maybe for a first flush TGOP Darjeeling, but you probably wouldn't know about that. Shall I serve?
Okay.
Splendid. Now, this probably all seems like silly kid stuff, but truth is, this is about as far as Americans get into serious tea drinking. For some reason, we've just never gotten hip to the fact that tea is the most popular beverage in the world, second only to water. Maybe it's the mind-numbing nomenclature, the perplexing paraphernalia, or tedious terminology. Either way, it's a shame, because with a few basic truths, some decent tools, and some good leaves, tea, either hot or cold, is definitely good eats. And this is pretty good for imaginary.
Yeah,
Can I
but
have some more?
Bear called you Goofy.
Bear called me Goofy. Although this concept has seen some improvements over the last few years, if you really want to sample what tea has to offer, you're going to have to stow your baggage and learn to play it loose. Now, for most Americans, venturing into a tea shop for the first time can be a little unsettling. But if you can ford the cross-cultural currents and sidestep the inevitable hills of hype, you'll find that tea is actually an incredibly simple thing, and getting a good cup of it is not rocket science. But you need to know some basics. For instance, there are three major styles of tea: green tea, black tea, and oolong tea. But don't worry, they all come from the exact same bush. Meet Camellia sinensis, a cousin of our garden variety camellia, which grows primarily in China, India, and Sri Lanka. The trees, which left to their own devices would climb to 60 feet, are pruned into a short, flat shape called a plucking table. This makes it possible to pick the two top leaves and the tip-top leaf bud, which are the only leaves the processor is concerned with. Properly maintained, a tea garden can be harvested or flushed many times a year, though no leaves are as desirable as those from the first flush. So, how can all these teas come from one plant? Varying degrees of human tinkering, of course. And there's no better place than to witness tenacious tea tinkering than here at Tazo Tea in Portland, Oregon. This room contains some of the finest teas on planet Earth. Where to start? Well, most people in the UK and here in America, when we think about tea, the tea we're really thinking of is black tea, like, say, this one from the Assam Valley in India. Let's crack it open. The Assam Valley is one of the most famous tea-growing regions of the world. And it was one of the first areas where the British started to cultivate tea immediately following the Opium Wars. But we'll get into that later. Now, of course, the leaves don't start out black like this. First, they're picked and then withered or dried for 12 to 24 hours. Well, here, see for yourself. The withering process reduces moisture so that the leaves can then be rolled. A rolling is either done by hand or machine, and it lightly crushes the leaves, exposing compounds inside to oxygen, thus setting off a series of chemical reactions. Now, when the desired level of oxidation is reached, the process is halted with a blast of hot air. The leaves are then sorted and crated up. Now, this entire process creates a chemical complexity that is revealed in the cup. In fact, the very best black teas brew up liquors of such robustness that they bear comparison to even fine red wines. As soon as the tea master is satisfied with the level of oxidation, he gives the leaves a shot of heat, shutting down the enzymatic action. Then the leaves are dried and crated up. Now, number two of the big T3, oolong. Very popular in Formosa, parts of China, and my house. Now, as you can tell by the lighter color, oolong teas are only partially oxidized, okay? They don't create as pungent a brew as black tea, but they more than make up for this with a kind of smoky complexity. In fact, the best ones remind me of really good scotch. Number three, green tea. Now, green teas are different because they are either pan-fried or steamed immediately after withering so that there is no oxidation at all, which is why they're still green. Then the leaves are either crushed, flattened like these, or rolled into different shapes before they are finally dried and shipped off. Now, green tea creates a very aromatic type of brew, much lauded for medicinal properties. Next up, grating. After processing, black oolong and some green teas are graded by size. They're simply passed through a set of progressively smaller mesh screens. Okay, now about 200 years ago, a guy named Sir Thomas Lipton decided that the tea grades needed to be standardized and named. So he came up with a system for doing just that. Now, I've spent a good bit of time pondering his nomenclature, and I got to tell you, I think that the old boy spent a little too much time in the hot Sri Lankan sun because it doesn't make any sense. But it is still in use. So here goes. Starting at the bottom, we've got dust. Now, some tea companies will put this inside their tea bags. Good tea companies, like Tazo, don't. Fannings. These are larger pieces. Because of their large surface area, these are the ideal thing to go inside tea bags because they infuse very, very quickly. And this is okay as long as the tea is of high quality to begin with. Next up, we have a grade that's called BOP. That means broken orange pecco. Basically just larger pieces of broken leaves. Then, after that, we've got OP, or orange pecco. And these are completely whole leaves. Now, in this case, orange does not refer to color. It doesn't refer to flavor or aroma. See what I mean? Too much time in the sun. Now, there are a whole lot of other grades that you could throw on top of this, but unless you're intending on blending tea or becoming an importer, you really don't have to know them. But if you are going to get into brewing loose leaf teas, and I hope that you will, what you do need to know is to buy OP, orange pecco teas, okay? Now after you've brewed up these for a while, you can move up to say TOP or GTOP or SGTOP. You get the point. Just remember, the more initials there are in the grade, the more you're going to pay for the tea. Until you get your tea legs, take a cue from the wine world and stick with big, reliable names. Black teas from Darjeeling and Assam here in India will never let you down. Neither will those from Sri Lanka, which is still called Ceylon in the tea trade, and Kimun here in China. Now, when it comes to oolongs, always look to Taiwan. And for green teas, well, just about anywhere in China. Now, Japan also makes excellent green teas, although they're a little bit more subtle than the Chinese versions. Then, of course, there are blends such as Irish and English breakfast teas, and of course Earl Grey, which may be named for an Englishman, but is actually composed of black India tea leaves, which have been tumbled with the peel of a bitter Mediterranean fruit called bergamot. Now, the real key to wise tea selection comes down to wise tea shop selection. Only frequent shops where you see the tea in tins like this. And of course, you always want the shopkeeper to be able to answer complicated questions like, Andy, when was this Empress of China harvested?
That was in the late fall.
Okay, when will you be getting more?
Early spring.
Well, why spring sometimes and fall
They
sometimes?
actually have two distinct harvests.
Two distinct harvested. That's the kind of thing I'm talking about. Thanks.
Meet Shin Nong, Chinese emperor and the mythological father of tea. Word has it that Emperor Shin was boiling some water in his garden one day in 2737 BC when some leaves from a wild bush fell into the pot. He decided to give the brew a taste and found himself mysteriously revitalized.
Like coffee, tea doesn't appreciate the company of heat, light, air, or moisture until it's brewing time. That's why fine teas have traditionally been sold and stored in little airtight tins like this. In fact, a lot of American merchants have gone to generic tins so that you can buy in bulk and still keep it properly stored. Now, unlike coffee, which starts to go stale the second it leaves the roaster, tea actually has an amazing shelf life. If properly contained, you can actually keep it in here for up to 2 years without a discernible loss of flavor. Tea bags are another matter altogether. You see, because the pieces in there are so small, they've got a greater surface area, so they go stale faster. Properly stored, you're only going to get 5 months out of that. Now that you have secured quality leaves, it is up to you to fulfill their potential, and that begins with water. Now, there are over 500 individual chemical compounds in tea, and if you want to taste the right ones, you're going to have to use H2O with plenty of O2 in it. That's right, oxygen is what does the job. And anybody that's ever had a fishbowl go bad on them knows that if water just sits around, it loses its O2. So you're going to have to use freshly drawn water. Now, if your tap water tastes good, go for it. But if you use a filter, you must draw off a fresh batch. Once you have secured the proper H2O, you're going to need something to boil it in. The kettle, for instance. Don't have one of these? Well, that's okay. The microwave's a good choice too. Just be sure to use a microwave-safe measuring cup bowl vessel of some type with a wooden skewer or chopstick placed inside. See, in order for water to actually boil, there's got to be a niche, a scratch, an imperfection somewhere on the inner surface of the container so the bubbles can form. If the container is super smooth and the microwave super strong, the water could superheat without actually boiling. Then you reach in for the container, you give it a jiggle, and kabloosh, it boils explosively, as in all over you. The skewer or chopstick gives the bubbles a place to grow, thus diffusing the situation. Now, besides the boiling vessel, we are going to need a pot. Now, I'm the first to admit, I've kind of got a thing for teapots. Not silver or china, mind you, though I don't have anything against them, but boy, I really dig the cast iron pots of Japan. Why? Well, they're cast iron. They get hot, they stay hot, which is good for the tea. Plus, well, look at them, they're cool. Of course, cool isn't always a good thing. That's because heat always moves towards cold. It's thermodynamics. If you don't preheat your pot, and I don't mean just this pot, but any pot, could be silver, china, anything, it is going to steal heat from the leaves, and that will leave you with a tepid, watery brew. End of story. So, just slosh it until you feel the heat come through the outside of the vessel. Won't take but a couple of minutes. Oh, and be sure to throw this out before you add the tea. This is a teaspoon. It's called a teaspoon because it holds a teaspoon. This is called a teaspoon, not because it holds one of these, but because the English figured out that a vessel of this general shape and size holds just the right number of leaves to produce a proper cup of tea. Now, I've spoken to a few experts who argue that this device cannot compensate for leaf size and should therefore be replaced with a digital scale capable of measuring grams. Now, I am all for weights and measures, but come on, grams? I want to make tea, not TNT. I'm going to stick with this. It's a lot more practical. Now, what I do is 1 teaspoon per cup. I just scoop, and whatever hangs on the spoon, hangs on the spoon. That goes right into the pot. I know they mean well, but you always run into these things. In truth, they're just not good for much because they don't give the leaves room to grow. Now, I keep them around because you could always use it to like hold herbs into a broth, or heck, you might need a new cage for your pet cricket. But for tea leaves, it's just not enough room. They've got to have room to bloom. So this is going to go straight in to the warm teapot. Now I'm going to make 2 cups, so I'm going to go with 2 spoonfuls. Now, the water. Since black teas, including our Ceylon, and blends like Earl Grey, Irish breakfast tea, and English breakfast tea prefer to bloom at a full whistling boil, the adage is to bring the pot to the kettle. Now, oolong and green teas prefer to bathe at 200 and 180 respectively, so the rule is to walk the kettle to the pot, which I guess gives it time to cool down. Now, when tea people talk cups, they don't mean cups. They mean cups. And this cup holds 5.5 to 6 ounces of water. So for 2 cups, I'm going to need about 12 ounces, plus 1 for the leaves to hold onto. Now, how can you be sure to get exactly the right amount? Well, I've devised this custom measuring device, which has been calibrated for single, double, and triple servings. Now, always pour onto the leaves, never the other way around. I'm just going to pour right up to the hash mark. There. Now, there's nothing to do but wait. How long? Black teas, generally 3 to 5 minutes. Oolongs, 4 to 7. Greens, 2 to 3 minutes. Seem like a lot of trouble to go through for a simple cup of tea? Maybe. But the way we see it, the simpler the thing is, the more the reason to do it right. Hard to believe that our original 2 teaspoons bloomed into this giant, wet, shaggy mass of leaves. This is why you've got to give them room to grow in the pot. Now, as far as additions go, I'm not too big on sweeteners in my tea, but milk would be very nice, thank you. But you've got to add it to the cup before you add the tea, not the other way around as you would with coffee. Now, as far as oolong and green teas go, they're better straight up. Subtle nuances, you know. Now, believe it or not, there's also a right way to taste tea. That's because, like wine, there are a lot of chemical compounds and human anatomy involved. Now, when professional tasters go to work, it looks and sounds like this.
concept of afternoon tea is credited to one Duchess of Bedford, who in 1840 began having snacks with tea at 4 p.m. in order to stave off what she called that sinking feeling.
Today, 80% of the tea drunk in the U.S. is drunk on ice. And yet there's more to making a perfect pot than throwing ice in tea. Start by brewing up a concentrated batch of hot tea, infusing a full ounce of loose black leaves in a quart of boiling water. Let this steep for about 4 to 5 minutes. Now, since cold masks subtle flavors, go with a good tea, but not a great tea. It would be wasted. When the time's up, strain into a pitcher large enough to hold at least 2 quarts of liquid. Now, once this is thoroughly strained through, we're going to add another quart of water, room temperature water. Why? Well, if we had just brewed with boiling water to begin with, we'd have a bunch of hot tea. It would have a long time to cool down enough to drink. If we were to add cold water, that would be even worse because boiling water extracts a lot of compounds from these leaves. Any sudden drop in temperature could force those solids out of solution and we'd end up with cloudy tea. And nobody wants to drink cloudy tea.
The year was 1904. The place, the St. Louis World's Fair. Among the many booths was that of Richard Bleckenden, an English promoter who had been hired by a group of Indian tea growers to get the fairgoers teed up. Problem was, there were no takers. It was just too darned hot that summer. Finally, in an act of inspired desperation, Bleckenden poured his tea over ice. And America would never be the same again.
Although it is possible to find high-quality tea bags these days, truth is, most, if not all, supermarket brands contain dust and fannings, which, when faced with boiling water, expel a bitter brew indeed. Of course, if you got to brew with these devices, do yourself a favor. Don't let the water boil. Here's the best way. 5 standard tea bags into a quart of freshly drawn water in a microwave-safe container. Now just top with a plate which will keep the heat in and also keep the little tags on the side dry. And into a microwave oven. Now cook this on high for 8 minutes. When it's done, carefully remove back to the counter. Now, carefully remove the plate and take its temperature. What we're looking for here is at least 180 and no more than 190 degrees. We'll definitely buy that. That's hot enough to extract the best of the flavor, but cool enough to leave the bad stuff in the bag. So, recover and leave it to steep. How long? Well, that depends. Oh, and no wringing out the bags. Of course, it just wouldn't be right to talk about iced tea without talking about sweeteners. Now, down here in the South, folks like to sweeten an entire batch. But I think sweet's kind of a subjective thing, so I leave it up to the individual drinker. Of course, science really isn't on our side here since sugar doesn't dissolve very well in cold liquids. It just sits on the bottom. You stir and stir and stir and it still just sits there on the bottom. The answer is a simple syrup. Just combine 5 cups of sugar and 3 cups of cold water in a small non-reactive pan and bring it to a boil slowly over medium heat, stirring every now and then. Then just cool it to room temperature, seal and refrigerate for up to a month or freeze for up to a year. Of course, if you really want to wow them, add 6 lemons sliced and a few sprigs of fresh mint. Bring it slowly to a boil and take it off and let it steep for 10 minutes before straining. Now, that leaves you with a great glass of what my grandmother calls sweet tea. Of course, you could use honey too, but that's another show. Tea doesn't contain as much caffeine as coffee, but it does contain polyphenols. And polyphenols help what caffeine is in tea absorb slowly into the system, which is why tea drinkers get a longer lasting but gentler lift, if you get my meaning. Now, unlike coffee, tea has been much lauded by the medical community, which is well represented here today. For instance, 5 out of the 5 dentists who recommend tea to their patients who drink tea have been thrilled by the fact that green tea in particular contains huge amounts of fluoride. Cancer researchers have been very impressed by the fact that animals who have been drinking black and green tea suffer fewer skin tumors, esophageal tumors, and what was that other tumor? Yeah, something inside. I don't remember either. Then, of course, the heart surgeons have been doing a lot of research too and have found that tea may actually be good for the ticker. So, there you have it. A properly brewed pot or pitcher of tea is contemplative, delicious, social, and well, darn good for you. And on top of that, it's really good eats. What do you think? Puppies? Give her some tea. Everything's going to be fine. You want some more? Oh, it is good.